Hello and welcome to part 2 of the mounting component for Unreal Engine 4. In this episode, we're going to hook up all of the interfaces that we added to our pawns and controller in the first video. And we're going to hook up the components that go with them. All this is going to end with us hooking up the seats for the mount. And at that point, that will officially be a completely hooked up version of the mounting system, minus any sort of interaction system that we need to hook up in order to do the mounting. I do plan on creating a part 3 where I create a very rudimentary interaction system so that we can have in this tutorial you will end it with a fully functional mountable horse or vehicle thing, whatever you have decided to do. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do now is hook up the unified pawn controller in the mounting character. So let's open that up, and then we're going to open up interfaces, mounting, interfaces, and then the IADM unified controller pawn interface. This has all the functions that we're going to be implementing, starting with is mounting. We're going to skip the first two and go straight to is mounting. It's a pretty simple function to implement. Grab the mount rider component, convert it to a validated get, because this particular function is pulled continuously from the animation blueprint. And in the end, what happens is we're going to get is mounted and hook that up. But in the end, what happens is when the system is shutting down, it seems to delete the component first. So when the component is deleted, it's still constantly trying to pull for this component. So we're going to use a validated get for that. And if it's false, we're just going to return. If it's not valid, we're just going to return false. Compile and save. So next is character mountable. This is a mounting character, so we're going to say false in this demonstration because the mounting character cannot be mounted by other pawns. Get character pawn. In this case, this is going to return self. So drag that out and type self. Next, we're going to go to get character mount. We're going to grab the mount rider component, which has a reference to our mount if we are mounted. Otherwise, it will return null if we are not mounted. And hook that in, compile and save. So get character controller is next. So get character controller, we're going to grab the get rider controller, which has a reference to the controller, and then we're just going to hook this right in. Control, compile, and save. So perform mount pawn. This function is called in a series of functions that start whenever you begin interacting with a possible mount, and eventually you will make it to this function. So implementation is pretty simple. Get the mount rider component and call mount pawn. The functionality is already set up and ready to go for you. And this will continue on the chain of events of functions that will eventually lead you to getting on and off your mount / vehicle. Okay, so perform dismount is pretty similar. Except we're going to do something a little different on this one. The chain of events for this is eventually going to lead us to dismount pawn, and what we're going to do with that. So we're going to go to the iMount rider, and we're just going to drag the begin dismounting function from the mount rider interface, and we're just going to hook that straight in. So if this function ever gets called, we're actually going to pass it straight through to the functionality of begin dismounting pawn. All right, so now we're going to set up the unified pawn controller interface inside the actual player controller. And this will also be set up on AI controllers if you're wanting your AI to mount things as well. We expand it all the way down to the unified controller pawn sections. And we're going to start with is mounted. Use the rider controller component to get is mounted, as that component is already set up to handle whether or not the controller is currently possessing a mount or a character. I go down to is mountable. The player controller is not mountable. You could set this up in different ways, but we're just going to ignore that for now. Then we're going to do get character pawn. Now we're going to use the rider controller for this to get owner pawn. This is a reference to the original character that the controller possesses. The first character it possesses is going to be its owned pawn, the pawn the player plays with. The subsequent second or other pawns that it possesses, it's going to treat as if they are mounts. You get character mount. And this function is going to return the current mount that the player or character is riding or driving. And the same thing, we're going to get the mount pawn from the rider controller component. Move that over, and then we're going to hook that straight into here. Then we're going to get controller. This one's pretty easy because we are the controller right now. So we're just going to return self. Just plug that right on in. So we're going to implement the function perform mount pawn. And to do this, all we need to do is grab that ride controller component, pull out the string, and type in perform mount pawn. The function in this component is set up already to do all the behavior needed in order to actually mount the pawn onto another mount. That's the beauty of using these components instead of rolling and implementing the interfaces from scratch. We'll perform dismount pawn. This is going to work very similar to the perform mount pawn. I'm going to grab the ride controller component, and we're going to pull out the string and search for perform dismount pawn. Like the mount pawn, this already has all the implementation needed to actually mount or dismount from the pawn and take back control of the original character that was driving or is mounted on the character. Okay, so we're going to hook up the unified controller pawn in the horse. The horse is a pawn, so therefore it's also going to get the unified controller pawn interface functionality. So the first function we're going to implement is mounted. Grab the mountable pawn component and pull out and search for the flag is mounted. And just move that like so, and then hook that straight into the return node, and we're done. So next we're going to go to is character mountable, which indicates that this particular pawn is a mountable character, that other characters can mount it. And inside the mountable pawn component is a function can mount. The simple flag that simply says I'm mountable. You can increase the logic in this however you want, put in kind of stop gaps, that conditions that have to be met, but for demonstration purposes we're just going to stick to can mount. The get character pawn. This is going to be our rider, always going to be the rider of our pawn. And this particular function has a seat ID. For this purpose, we're going to just return the driver, which is seat 0. Next, go to character mount. This is always going to be the actual mount. And for this, we're going to return ourself because we're the horse. And the horses are mounts. So next we're going to do get character controller. And we're going to keep this one pretty simple. We're going to simply return get controller. So this will be the AI controller or the actual player character controller, depending on what is currently possessing the horse or our vehicle. Now we're going to go to perform mount pawn. So what this does, this is called by the interaction function that is part of the interaction interface. So when interact is called, it calls perform mount pawn. So we're going to drag this out and type in begin mounting pawn. This is the mount rider interface of the character attempting to mount this horse or vehicle. And so it's basically telling this character to go ahead and start mounting. Start mounting this horse or this vehicle. That's what the stealth is indicating. So now we'll do the perform dismount. And for vehicles, this function doesn't really get called in part of the chains. It's always on the actual character that this function gets called. You could set this up to be called in the chain. You just have to be very careful not to create any sort of loops. All right, so now we're going to set up the mount rider interface. And that is located on the BP mounting character. Open this up. Mounting, interfaces, mount rider. The first thing we're going to look at is play mounting animation. We're not going to hook this up, but this is where, if you had mounting animation, this is where, according to the position that you are at, that'd be fed in there, you would play a specific montage to mount the horse or vehicle. Dismounting works the same way as play mounting animation. If you have animation for it, you would play that montage here. You return true if you have a montage to play. On move to mounting location complete, this function is called when move to mounting location is finished. And this is pretty simple. We're going to just grab the mount rider component. Type in move to mount location complete. The component already has that functionality hooked up and ready to go, so we just slide it on in. Compile and save. So now go to on mounting pawn finished. This is called whenever the pawn has finished mounting, usually when the animation is done. If that play mounting animation has finished, or if that play mounting animation returns false, we automatically move here. And once again, the component already has this function implemented, so we're just going to pass that in, pawn finish mounting. And then on dismounting pawn finished, similar to on mounting pawn finished, it's called when the dismounting pawn animation is finished. And we just hook it on up to dismount finished. Compile and save. So as mentioned before, move to mounting location is called whenever you first initiate interaction with the vehicle or horse. It tries to move you to this location. If you have a way to move the character to that location, which there are different ways to do this, so this is why the implementation is left up to you. It's just going to return false for now, which means we're going to skip it. So isDriver is simple enough. We grab the mount rider component and get the isDriver function, and we just pass that on through. So now I do begin mounting. This function is called after initiating the interaction with the horse through a chain of other events that eventually leads to this, the begin mounting pawn. This is where the magic for mounting the character actually starts. So I'm going to move that over, and we only want to do this when we are the authority. I'm just going to grab a switch authority here. Pull that on over. We could do some stuff when we're the remote, but the actual action of mounting, starting the mounting of the horse is going to be on authority. And we're going to get the controller. And then drag this out, and then we'll call perform mount pawn. And this is an interface function. So it's a message, and we're just going to connect that right in. Now, one of the parameters is the actual mount that we will be mounting, and so we're going to hook that right in. And this kicks off the mounting procedure from to the controller. If we're not the authority, we're just going to return false for now. There's other things you can do here, but we're not going to do them for demonstration. So begin dismount pawn, similar to the begin mounting pawn. This is part of the chain that triggers the character to dismount and get off of the mount or out of the vehicle. So grab the mount rider component and then do dismount pawn. So we're just going to hook that right on up. Turn whatever it returns. And then we're going to feed it the pawn that we plan on dismounting. Okay, we're going to set up the mountable pawn now and open up the blueprint horse. Under interfaces, mounting, interfaces, mountable pawn. We're going to select set seat occupied. The first function we're going to implement. This is basically setting the seat on the horse as being occupied by a player. We're going to grab the component and we're going to get the function set seat occupied. Move that on over, push that in there, connect the strings, return variables. So a lot of the functionality is going to be passed along through some of the other components and interfaces. So we're going to already have the seat index that the character wants to mount and the rider that is mounting it. So we're going to do must have driver. This function indicates that the vehicle or horse must have a driver who is the first person to mount the vehicle or enter the vehicle. And that is set up through the mountable pawn component as a simple Boolean value. The is mountable pawn. Yes, this is a mountable pawn, so we're just going to return true for that because the horse is a mountable pawn. You can have other checks here, whether the horse or vehicle is owned, whether it's tamed and whatnot. Next, we're going to do has driver. Basically, does this vehicle have a driver, which is handled by that component again, and has a handy-dandy function, has driver. Plug that in. Move it over some. Plug it in. There we go. Compile and save. I always compile and save. It's a habit of mine. It's a good one to get into. Get relative position to mount. This is a special function specific to mount. So basically it allows you to, per mount, figure out special for that mount, what side you can mount on. And to do that, basically we're just going to say it has a left side and a right side. So you can mount the horse from the left, you can mount the horse to the right. Our animations that I have, that's the only options that I really built. I didn't want to build a forward animation. We're going to use a function called get angle from right between actors. It sounds a little confusing, but basically that's what it does. It gets an angle from the right. Get the angle between the right direction of the main actor and the position of the target actor. This is highly useful for determining the field of view of the main actor or what side of the horse you're getting on. If it's the right side, it'll return 1. If it's the front or rear, it'll be 0. And if it's to the left, it will be a -1. So we're going to determine, so long as this value, if this value is greater than 1, then we're going to go on the right side. If the value is less than 1, we're going to go on the left side. This is basic game math working here. There's also get angle from front and get angle from above, I believe, if I remember that function name correctly. Get mount body is just, we want the mesh that the character is going to be mounted to, usually the skeletal mesh, because we're going to need bones and sockets that we want to attach to. Get max riders. This is the maximum number of people that can ride this mount. For a horse, that's generally 2, but what we're going to use is the number of seats available to the mount. Let's see, get dismount direction. You can set this up similar to how we did get relative position to mount, but I'm just going to say we're always get off on the left because my best animation for dismounting is on the left. Get current rider count. Again, we're going to grab that mountable pawn component and we're going to say get num riders. Handy dandy function built right into the component. Find available mounting position is a utility function that basically allows the pawn to find the best position to mount according to the number or the seats that it has available. So you feed it in the desired position of mounting left or right, as well as the current rider's location. And this function from the mountable pawn component spits out a desired seat location. If you have to have a driver, then it will always spit out the driver seat. Clear seat by ID basically allows you to clear the seat that was occupied by a rider. Let me just set that ID. Oop, there we go. Compile and save. And we do can mount pawn. Grab that mountable pawn component, pull this out, and we do get num seats. Move that down, and then we're going to get num riders. And so if we have more seats than riders, that's one indication that we can mount. And we're also going to pull in the is mountable pawn because we could have logic in this function that determines if the horse or vehicle is mountable. And compile and save. Now, can mount at position basically is just a question of if I'm standing on the left or the right or front, back, top, bottom of this vehicle, is there a seat available for me according to the position that I'm standing at? So I use that same function, find available mounting, and just kind of passes whether that came back true or not. All right, so now we're going to set up the ride controller interface that exists on our player controller and will also exist on our AI controller when we want to use it. The first thing to do is we're going to create our RPC call that we're going to need for this. And we're going to call this server underscore possess pawn. And this is going to call our possess character interface function. Yes, we could have named it possess character, but for some reason I decided to go with pawn right now. So go over to the interfaces, mounting, interfaces, rider controller, and grab possess character. And we're going to connect the main lines. And then through Unreal Magic, we're going to add a parameter to the server possess pawn. We're going to set that on run on server and reliable. This function is called on the client during the chain of events that eventually possess the horse or the character whenever you're mounting or dismounting. So it's pretty important. Inside possess character, this is going to be pretty straightforward. Like our other functions, we're going to do a has authority switch. We're going to connect the main lines of that. And so if we have authority, we're just going to possess our desired character. And the desired character is sent in through the function as a parameter, and it's part of the normal chain of events that happens whenever you're possessing and unpossessing. So if we are possessing, then we're going to return true for this function. If we are the remote, we're going to return we're not going to return anything. We're going to return false, but we're going to go to the server possess pawn, and then we're going to send the character to possess into that server function. And then to complete our top layer, we're going to pass that same character to possess into the possession function there, blueprint node. So let's connect that and unchecked return value. And we're going to save that, compile and save. So let's go to on pawn possessed. This is implemented in each one of our pawn characters. Because we don't have access to the controller's possess and unpossess functionality, we have to kind of get around this by using the character's on possessed functionality. So whenever on each of the characters that are possessed, from the character to the mount, the controller interface function possess character is called. And this function is actually the implementation of that. We're going to grab the writer controller component, and we're going to do set controlled pawn. This function does two things, but together. The first time it's called, it's going to set the controlled pawn, basically the character that you are playing as in the game. The second time it's called, it's going to treat that next pawn as the mount. So the second time you call this function, it's always going to set that as the mount. Now you can override this if you want, if you have special logic. There's other functions called set controlled pawn, set owned pawn, and then set mount pawn. So depending on how you want to implement it, you can do it this way, but this is the fastest way to do so. Okay, so we're going to set up some possession callbacks to the controller from the characters. We're going to begin with a mounting character, and you're going to right click, add event, and scroll down till you find possessed. So we're going to take this new controller and on pawn possessed. We're going to call that interface function from the ride controller interface, and we're going to pass ourselves into this. We're going to pass the pawn into that. You can actually just override the possess function in C++, but we can't do that in Blueprint, so we have to do this here. We're going to do the same thing for the horse. I'm going to do on possessed, or possessed, the event possessed, and we're going to call that same function on pawn possessed, and pass in the self. Pile and save. Okay, so now we're going to set up our seats. This is kind of what we've been building up to. All the components work together to kind of set the seats on all the mounts or vehicles as occupied or not occupied. And so to begin with that, let's open up our mount, which is the horse. Bring that up. And we're going to select the mountable pawn component, which is where our seat manager is. You see we have a isMountable variable, and we want to set that to true. And that's actually going to trigger our function, the isMountable function on the interface that is pulled from our mountable pawn component, to be true. As you can see, there's a few other variables there. The first one is max valid mounting distance squared. This is the squared value of the distance that you can safely mount. And this is actually, when you square root it, 300 units, which is why our trace is also 300 units. The driver's seat index is the index within our array of seats that indicates where the driver's seat is. And the forced driver's seat indicates that we are forcing a driver for this mount. So we're going to add two elements to the seats. And the first one is going to be seat 0, which is our driver's seat, and the second one is going to be seat 1. And now we're going to set the seat socket name as S driver seat. And then for the passenger seat, it's going to be S passenger seat. These are the names of the sockets that we have added to our horse. So now for each one of these seats, there are two possible places you can mount, the left side or the right side. So we're going to add mounting data for the left side and the right side. The mount position is the actual relative position to the mount that we're going to be mounting to. So we're going to have a left side and right side, and then the relative mount value there, that's actually a relative position offset from the current position of the horse that you can mount. So it's 30 units forward, negative 50 units to the left, and negative 90 units down for the mount left side. It's going to be negative 30 units backwards, 50 units to the right, and negative 90 units for mount right side of the passenger seat. The passenger is slightly behind the center of the horse. Same thing for the left side. We're going to do negative 90, negative 50, then negative 30, negative 50, negative 90. Compile and save. And now our seats are all set up and ready to go. Okay, so at this point, we are officially done setting up the mounting component. From a mounting component standpoint, this doesn't include the interaction system that we still need to build in order to actually interact with the horse and get on the horse. But in your game, this is the extent of what you need to do in order to get the mounting system working. So follow me for the next video where I'm going to be setting up the interaction system, or a rudimentary interaction system, for the tutorial of this game. Again, if you just want to skip on to the end, you can download the final product of this whole tutorial and take a look there. But this is pretty much all that you need to know about the mounting system. Thank you, and hope to see you again later.